October 17th, 2009. Cold wind rolled across the auction yard outside Clay Center, Kansas, while dozens of farmers gathered around broken combines and old tractors nobody wanted anymore. Near the back of the lot sat a rusted 1984 Massey Ferguson 2705 with faded paint, leaking oil, and one flat rear tire. Most people barely looked at it, but Walter Boone did. Walter was 62, quiet, weathered, and known around town as the stubborn old farmer who still trusted old iron more than computers. While younger farmers bought GPS tractors and modern systems, Walter still repaired machines by hand inside a small wooden workshop his father built decades earlier. Then Raymond Keller arrived, owner of Keller Motors, rich, loud, proud of every new machine he sold. The moment he saw Walter staring at the Massey Ferguson, he laughed. "That thing ain't a tractor," Raymond shouted across the yard. "It's scrap metal wearing tires." The crowd laughed with him. One mechanic from Keller Motors kicked the tire and said the transmission alone would cost more than the machine was worth. Another called it a museum piece for broke farmers. Walter stayed silent. Then the auctioneer asked for bids. Nobody raised a hand. Until Walter slowly lifted his bidding card. 1,200. People burst out laughing again. Raymond shook his head. "Walter, you planning to farm with that thing or bury it?" Walter looked calmly at the old tractor. "Machines don't quit because they're old," he said quietly. "People quit on them first." The auctioneer slammed the hammer. "Sold." And instead of towing the tractor home, Walter climbed into the seat right there in front of everyone. The engine coughed once, then again. Black smoke exploded into the cold air before the old Massey roared alive with a deep growl that silenced half the crowd instantly. Walter sat there listening to the idol like man hearing an old friend's voice after many years. Then he drove the tractor slowly out of the auction yard, while Raymond Keller laughed behind him, but not as confidently as before, because something about that machine felt different, and nobody there knew the truth yet. That tractor had once belonged to Walter's father. Henry Boone was one of the best farm mechanics in Kansas during the 1970s. Farmers drove from 3 counties away because Henry could repair machines everybody else had given up on. Walter grew up beside him inside an old machine shed filled with diesel smoke, hanging tools, and winter winds pushing through cracked wooden walls. His father taught him that machines had character. Some were weak, some were stubborn, and some were honest. The Massey Ferguson became the last tractor they ever worked on together. Back in 1983, during the drought years, Henry brought the machine home through connections Walter never fully understood. Even then, the tractor behaved strangely. It pulled harder than normal models. It handled deep mud better than newer equipment. And Henry never allowed anyone else to touch the engine. Then, in February of 1987, Walter found his father dead beside that same tractor inside the workshop. After the funeral, most people expected Walter to lose the farm, but he stayed. Year after year, flood after flood, harvest after harvest, and the old Massey stayed with him, not because it was valuable, because it reminded him of the last years he had with his father. But there was something else Walter discovered after Henry died. Inside an old cardboard box hidden in the workshop were maintenance logs, engineering notes, and factory papers stamped by Massey Ferguson. Walter read them alone late at night, beneath a single hanging light bulb. And one sentence changed everything. Prototype evaluation unit, experimental low-end torque platform, not approved for commercial production. The old Massey Ferguson was never an ordinary tractor, and what Walter would eventually reveal from those hidden service records would humiliate Raymond Keller in front of the entire town. Over the next few weeks, the story of Walter Boone buying the scrap tractor spread across Clay Center faster than anyone expected, mostly because Raymond Keller made sure everybody heard about it. Every morning at Keller Motors, Raymond repeated the story to customers standing beside shiny new tractors worth more than most houses in town. He laughed about Walter the way rich men laugh when they believe time itself is on their side. Man's trying to survive 2009 with a tractor built during Reagan's first term. Raymond joked one afternoon while showing off a GPS display system to local farmers. People laughed politely, some because they agreed, Others because Raymond Keller controlled financing for half the county. And out in Kansas, men often laughed at the people they secretly feared becoming. Meanwhile, Walter Boone kept farming exactly the way he always had, quietly, before sunrise. Each morning, neighbors could hear the low diesel rumble of the old Massey Ferguson rolling through the cold darkness outside town. The tractor smoked, leaked oil, shook harder than modern equipment, but it never stopped. That part began bothering people, especially after heavy autumn rain started falling across the county in late to late October. Kansas soil changed completely after enough rain. Thick, black dirt turned into deep, sucking mud, capable of trapping combines, trucks, and tractors twice the size of Walter's old Massey. And that year, the rain would not stop. New GPS tractors from Keller Motors started developing electrical problems in soaked fields. Sensors failed. Guidance systems lost calibration. One machine shut down completely after mud damaged a wiring harness beneath the chassis. Farmers complained quietly at first, then louder. Raymond kept insisting the problems were temporary. Technology has adjustments, he told customers confidently. That's the future. But while expensive tractors sat parked beside barns waiting for repairs, Walter Boone kept working. People noticed that too, especially a 14-year-old neighbor boy named Eli Turner. Eli lived with his mother 2 farms away after his father left years earlier. The boy spent most afternoons riding his bicycle around nearby properties, trying to stay out of his empty house. One evening, he stopped beside Walter's field and watched the old Massey Ferguson drag a heavy grain wagon through mud deep enough to bury half the tires. The tractor moved slowly, painfully slowly, but steadily, like an animal too stubborn to die. Eli waited until Walter parked beside the barn after sunset. "Mr. Boone," he asked carefully, "how's that old thing pulling like that?" Walter climbed down from the cab without answering immediately. Rainwater dripped from the edge of his hat. Finally, he looked back toward the tractor. "Most machines quit because people run 'em wrong," he said. Eli frowned. "But Raymond Keller says those old tractors don't have enough torque for this kind of ground." Walter wiped grease from his hands with a rag. "Raymond Keller reads brochures," he replied quietly. "Your problem comes when a brochure meets real dirt." Eli laughed. Walter didn't. Instead, he glanced toward the workshop behind the barn, and for just a moment, something changed in his expression, like an old memory rising back to the surface. "You ever hear of prototype machines?" Walter asked. Suddenly, the boy shook his head. Walter looked at the Massey again before speaking. "Back in the early 80s, companies were scared," he said. Farmers needed stronger tractors for heavier soil and bigger equipment. Some engineers wanted more electronics. Others believed torque mattered more than computers. Eli listened closely. Walter rarely talked this much. Couple manufacturers tested experimental drivetrains. Walter continued. Most never made production. Too expensive. Too unconventional. The boy stared at the old tractor. "You saying this one's special?" Walter smiled faintly. "Special ain't always the same thing as valuable." Then he changed the subject immediately. But later that night, after Eli rode home, Walter walked alone into the workshop carrying an old metal key. The building smelled like cold steel and dust. Moonlight slipped through gaps in the wooden walls, while Walter crossed toward a rusted cabinet in the corner. Inside sat the faded cardboard box, the same box his father had hidden decades earlier. Walter opened it carefully. Maintenance records, engineering sketches, handwritten notes, and one document stamped October 1983. Experimental Field Evaluation Program. Low RPM High Torque Agricultural Platform. Walter stared at the paper silently. He still remembered the night he first read those words after his father died. Back then, he had spent hours studying diagrams he barely understood. Special gearing ratios, reinforced driveline modifications, weight distribution adjustments, specifically designed for heavy clay soil conditions. His father had been helping test one of the machines, not officially, quietly. And according to the records, Massey Ferguson canceled the entire project before release because manufacturing costs were too high. Most prototype units were dismantled, but somehow Henry Boone kept this one. Walter slowly ran his fingers across his father's handwriting near the bottom of the page. This machine pulls like old mules, slow, but impossible to stop. Walter closed the box gently, because this story was never really about horsepower. It was about endurance. And outside, the rain kept falling harder every night. By the second week of November, the county was in trouble. Fields flooded. Harvest schedules collapsed. Machines got buried axle-deep in mud across dozens of farms. Then disaster finally reached Raymond Keller himself. Keller Motors had partnered with one of the largest farms in the region for a massive late harvest operation involving brand new GPS-controlled tractors and grain systems. It was supposed to prove Raymond's machines were the future of Kansas farming. Instead, it became a public humiliation. 3 tractors got trapped in deep mud within the same afternoon. One electronic steering system failed completely after water damaged the sensors. Another tractor overheated trying to pull free. Workers stood helpless in freezing rain, while expensive equipment sank deeper by the hour. And the worst part was this: nearly half the town came to watch. Farmers always show up when arrogance begins collapsing, especially rural towns. By sunset, headlights lined the muddy road beside Keller's fields, while men stood in silence, watching million-dollar equipment lose against Kansas dirt. Raymond shouted at mechanics. Mechanics blamed the weather. The weather kept getting worse. Then one older farmer quietly said the words nobody expected. "Call Walter Boone." Raymond turned immediately. "No." The farmer shrugged. "You want those machines out before morning, don't you?" Another man nodded slowly. "That old Massey's still moving through mud." Raymond's jaw tightened. He hated Walter Boone more in that moment than he ever had at the auction yard, because now people were comparing them openly. The loud, rich dealer with modern technology, and the quiet old farmer everyone used to laugh at. Rain hammered against truck hoods, while Raymond stared across the buried field. Finally, with visible disgust, he muttered, "Fine, call him." Walter Boone arrived just after 8 that night. The rain had slowed to a freezing drizzle, but the field looked worse than before. Massive tires sat buried deep in black mud, while expensive tractors leaned helplessly beneath floodlights and truck beams. The crowd parted almost automatically when the old Massey Ferguson rolled onto the field road. Its headlights were weak. Its paint looked nearly black beneath the rain, and compared to the giant modern machines surrounding it, the tractor looked small enough to be laughed away. But nobody laughed now. People watched silently as Walter climbed down from the cab and walked through the mud toward the first trapped tractor. Raymond Keller stood nearby with horn and fury. "You sure that antique can handle this?" he asked coldly. Walter looked at the buried machine, then at the mud, then quietly said, "Your problem ain't horsepower." Raymond crossed his arms. "Then what is it?" Walter pressed his boot into the soaked ground. "Wait," he answered. "These new tractors fight the field. Old ones learned how to move through it." A few older farmers exchanged glances, because they understood exactly what he meant. Modern machines relied on speed, electronics, and power. But old Kansas farmers understood something engineers sitting behind desks often forgot. Wet ground punished arrogance. Walter hooked heavy chains onto the first trapped tractor himself. No rush, no speech, just steady hands moving beneath cold rain. Then he climbed back into the Massey. The engine growled low and deep as he eased forward. At first, nothing happened. Mud spun beneath the tires. The crowd leaned closer. Then slowly, impossibly slowly, the buried tractor began moving. An inch, then another. The Massey Ferguson never roared, never lunged, never fought. It simply kept pulling, like it had all the time in the world. And one by one, 40,000 pounds of trapped machinery started sliding backward out of the mud. The crowd went silent, not the polite silence from the auction yard. This was different. This was the silence people fall into when something they mocked begins proving them wrong in front of their own eyes. One mechanic from Keller Motors stepped closer, staring at the drivetrain. "That torque curve makes no sense," he muttered. Walter kept pulling. Another tractor came free, then another. Hour after hour, the old Massey moved steadily through conditions newer machines couldn't survive. And somewhere around midnight, Raymond Keller finally realized the worst part of all this. People were no longer watching his tractors. They were watching Walter Boone, A young mechanic eventually approached Walter while he tightened chains near the final machine. "Mr. Boone," he asked carefully, "what exactly is inside that thing?" Walter looked toward the Massey sitting beneath rain and floodlights. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he walked quietly back toward the tractor cab and returned carrying a weathered cardboard box. The same box hidden in his workshop for over 20 years. The crowd gathered closer, while Walter removed several folded documents protected inside old plastic sleeves. One's paper still carried the original Massey Ferguson engineering seal, dated 1983. Another contained drivetrain schematics, and another clearly read, "Experimental Prototype Evaluation Unit. Low, high torque and agricultural platform." People stared in disbelief. Even Raymond stepped closer. Walter handed the papers silently to one of the mechanics. The young man studied them for several seconds before looking up slowly. "This thing," he whispered. "This isn't a standard 2705. Walter nodded once. "No," he said quietly. "Never was." The mechanic looked stunned. These prototypes were canceled before production. Walter glanced toward the tractor. "My father helped field test this one." A heavy silence passed across the field. Rain tapped softly against metal, while men who had laughed at Walter weeks earlier stood staring at the machine like they were seeing it for the first time. Then Raymond finally spoke. "You knew?" he asked. Walter looked at him calmly. "My father knew." Raymond swallowed hard. All at once, the memory of the auction yard came rushing back. Scrap metal wearing tires, the laughter, the mockery, the humiliation. And now half the county stood watching the same scrap tractor rescue machines worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But Walter Boone still wasn't finished, because then he said the words people in Clay Center would repeat for years afterward. "My father never kept this tractor because it was rare," Walter said softly. "He kept it because it never abandoned anybody." Nobody answered, not even Raymond Keller. By sunrise, every trapped machine had been pulled free, and the old Massey Ferguson still sat idling calmly beneath the gray Kansas sky. What happened after that spread far beyond Clay Center. Within weeks, collectors began calling Walter, offering enormous money for the tractor. Some claimed it belonged in museums. Others wanted it restored and displayed at agricultural expos. Walter refused every offer. To him, selling the Massey would have felt like selling part of his father. Meanwhile, Keller Motors suffered badly, not because their tractors were useless, but because people remembered Raymond Keller, laughing at a man who understood the land better than he did. Farmers started talking differently after that winter. Less about advertisements, less about touchscreen displays, more about reliability, experience, humility, and strangely enough, Raymond Keller himself changed too. One snowy evening in January, he drove alone to Walter Boone's farm. No Cadillac this time, just an old pickup. Walter found him standing quietly beside the workshop while snow drifted across the yard. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Raymond finally said, "I came to apologize." Walter studied him silently. Raymond looked older than before, smaller somehow. "I spent years believing money meant understanding," Raymond admitted. "Truth is, I stopped listening to the people who actually work the land." Walter nodded slowly. Then, to Raymond's surprise, he opened the workshop door. Inside, the old Massey Ferguson rested beneath hanging lights, surrounded by tools, chains, and the smell of oil and cold iron. Walter handed Raymond a wrench. The dealer looked confused. "What's this for?" Walter shrugged. "Hydraulic line. He's replacing." And for the next 2 hours, the two men worked side by side beneath the same machine Raymond once mocked publicly. No speeches, no audience, no pride left to protect. Just the sound of tools against steel. After that winter, Raymond Keller never laughed at old farmers again, and Walter Boone remained exactly who he had always been. Quiet, steady, uninterested. Every morning before sunrise, people still heard the deep growl of the old Massey crossing frozen Kansas fields, and over time, the story became something larger than a tractor. Parents told it to sons. Farmers told it at diners during harvest season. Mechanics repeated it in workshops late at night, not because of the machine itself, but because people recognized something true inside it. The world has always been too quick to laugh at worn things. Old tractors, Old farms, old men with rough hands and quiet voices. But age does not always mean weakness. Sometimes the strongest things are the ones that survived what newer things never could. And sometimes the people everybody overlooks are carrying knowledge the world won't understand until the moment it desperately needs saving.